You are listening to Small Business Straight Talk with your host, Amber De La Garza. Amber is a sought-after coach, trainer, speaker, and writer who gives small business owners the straight talk on productivity, time management, business systems, leading your teams, strategic decision-making, and mindset. No BS, fluff, or overused jargon. Just actionable strategies to get results and succeed in business. And here is your host, Amber De La Garza, the productivity specialist.
Welcome, and thank you for listening to the Small Business Straight Talk podcast. Today is episode 379, Lead with Love, Eradicating Workplace Toxicity with Dr. Sam Adeyemi. If you're a small business owner who wants to learn effective business strategies, improve time management, and elevate productivity to maximize profits, reduce stress, and make time for what matters most, then you're in the right place, and I'm so glad you've joined me. In today's episode, you're going to meet our guest, Sam Adeyemi. He is the CEO of Sam Adeyemi GLC Inc. and founder and executive director of Daystar Leadership Academy. More than 45,000 alumni have graduated from DLA programs, and more than 3 million CEOs and high-performing individuals follow him on top social media sites. Dr. Sam's new book is Dear Leader, Your Flagship Guide to Successful Leadership. He holds a doctorate in strategic leadership from Virginia Regent University and is a member of the International Leadership Association. And before we jump into today's interview, just a couple reminders. One, if you have not already done so, I just wanted to remind you that we just finished up a Work Review Extreme series. Be sure to go back and listen to those previous 3 episodes around how to show up as a balanced leader. And second, I would like to invite you to take my next level business owner quiz. What is more productive than taking a short quiz to find out what's most holding you back from getting your business to the next level? You'll receive a personalized, curated playlist of podcast episodes that address your specific challenges with actionable strategies you can implement immediately. Head on over to amberdelagarza.com/quiz. And now, let's meet our guest and get to the straight talk. Welcome to the podcast, Sam. Thank you so much for being here. I am really looking forward to this conversation. Man, I have been in business for almost 15 years as a business coach, and this topic of toxicity in the business comes up so frequently as such a challenge for small business owners. So I can't wait to dive in and get real practical strategies on how to handle sometimes a really uncomfortable situation. Before we dive in, I would love to know a little bit about your background. We didn't get your official bio on why do I get to talk to you about workplace toxicity and how to handle that as a leader.
Thank you so much, Amber. Thank you for having me here.
Yes.
Right. Now, I am passionate about entrepreneurship and about entrepreneurs. It just happened that I grew up in Africa, right? And I grew up in Nigeria. My dad he used to be a civil servant working for the government, and then he started his own business, right? So I grew up on construction sites, literally, because he was in construction. And then I studied civil engineering myself, right? But then the business went down. In fact, by the time I was out of college, when I thought I would just go straight into work in my dad's business, the business was gone. And I had to start a job. And our family went through a very difficult time financially. That put me in despair. It was like, I wasn't even sure what the future was going to be like for me anymore. And
of course.
I started my own search. Was there a system? Were there any principles that could really guarantee one's outcome in life? I began to read books and so on. I read Tough Times Never Last, But Tough People Do by Robert Schuller and The Power of Positive Thinking. And I began to apply those principles step by step. And honestly, my life changed. My life changed to the point where I then went on radio 30 years ago. in Nigeria and began to teach basic principles for success. I was the first person in the country to do that. Just 15 minutes in the week, and it was boom, right?
Wow. They were ready for that message, to hear it from you.
Thank you. Because of the high level of deprivation in the environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, in analyzing people's problems, their needs, poverty came number one. Again, this was Africa. And the question was, okay, how do we address the poverty problem? That made me focus a bit more on financial education and so on. And that's why I happened big on entrepreneurship. It was like, that's the big opportunity, right?
Yeah. So full circle moment from watching your dad and his business going all the way and coming full circle to entrepreneurship being the answer.
Exactly, right? Mm-hmm. So I then began to speak a lot on entrepreneurship. I began to speak a lot on entrepreneurship, and then I saw loads and loads and loads of people starting businesses. And this was, remember, some 30 years ago, 25 years ago, and today, I hear a lot of stories. I meet them practically everywhere that I go, right? Doing well in business. Of course, then that's made me more sensitive to their needs as entrepreneurs, right? Mm-hmm. I've run businesses of my own. I've had businesses of my own. And I'm therefore very conversant with issues that have to do with culture and behavior and so on. In the process, I was teaching success principles on radio. And then leadership also became a big topic for me. Mm-hmm. At the highest level of success, you actually empower other people to succeed, right? That's the job of a leader. It's better, who said that? D.L. Moody. It's better to put 10 men to work than to do the work of 10 men, right? So you multiply your capacity for success when you learn to lead people. You learn to inspire people to achieve big goals. So even though my background was in engineering, when I began to study leadership, I realized, oh my God, that's another area where you have a big gap in Africa and then globally. So I went for my master's degree in leadership. And then eventually I did my doctoral program in strategic leadership, right, at Regent University here in Virginia. And with that, I became a coach, right? I became a coach and a consultant in strategic leadership. So these days I focus a lot on leaders, and my primary base are entrepreneurial leaders, right? So that's how come I'm in here today to talk about what goes on.
Yes, I love that you shared that full circle moment, because you and I are just getting to meet. So that actually gives so much context. You know, what I find with my clients and talking to business owners is that I often hear a phrase or some version of a phrase of, I don't know what happened. One day I woke up and I'm a business owner. One day I woke up and hold on, I'm responsible for all these people. I'm a leader. I intended to go into business because I had an idea. I had a special skill set. I had something I want to give the world. But I believe we're not meant to do this alone. And for many people, they didn't realize that having the skill set of leadership is key for success in running a business.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So with all of this experience and coaching, and what we're going to talk about today is toxic people in the work environment. And I got to tell you, a little background here is that the toxic people in my previous career was maybe a key part of me starting my own business, because I was like, I don't want that. I don't want to go back to that. Mm-hmm. I felt like it was the Hunger Games at the corporate, in the corporate world, and whose team were you on? And, you know, when you suggested this topic, I have specific people in mind through my own journey where they were so toxic, and you look around and you say, but hold on, like, how does leadership not see that they're so toxic?
Right.
And in my experience, and I'd love for you to speak to this, is it became normalized because they had some sort of leverage on the company, or they had so much history with leadership that they closed an eye to this behavior that was actually affecting really good employees all around them.
You are right. So this has been my experience as a coach. Some CEOs, especially founders, come to realize that some of their most effective people that make money for the business are toxic. Right? They're bringing money, but they're hurting people in the process. They're breaking people emotionally in the process. So, and that makes it difficult for the founder. It's like, oh my God, I fired this guy. I fired my money, my income, so to speak. I fired the business income and so on, and they are caught in between. Generally, people that have walked their way to the top assume they're leaders. Assume that automatically makes them leaders, right? And a lot of people have wrong concepts about leadership. They think, of course, they're usually brilliant people, right? Smart people, effective people with strong drive who can achieve goals, right? So they're successful. So to them, whatever it is they did that got them to where they are is justified. To them, it must be right. Many people think being a leader makes you superior to the people you're leading. The structures built around success tend to feed your ego. So the higher you go, the more successful you are, the bigger everything gets, right? You get the bigger title, you get the bigger office, you get the bigger pay. And then I tell people, if you're not careful, you get the bigger head. Right?
Yes.
You don't know when the arrogance is seeping in and that sense of superiority over other people. Some people just simply also came out of toxic environments, right? They just simply, that's all they've known. I have a friend who is an entrepreneur now, but when he used to work with someone else as a lawyer, his boss, highly successful, very wealthy, was extremely rude to his employees. He could call you any name, insult you anyhow, because he was paying you anyway. And he could sack you at any moment. He could fire you at any moment. Just tell you, you know what, I'm tired of you, you're fired. And then the employee...
Tyrant behavior, not leadership behavior.
Thank you. And his employees knew what to do. They just had to find one of his good friends and get the friend to beg him, and he would hire you back. So, and then he did it to my friend once, and it happened that my friend had just made some major expenses. He had no savings. So he had to go plead with his friends to beg him. The guy took him back. But my friend told himself, the next time it ever happens, I'm gone for good. And it did happen. And my friend never went back, set up his own business. Now, you then have to be careful if you've been in such an environment. If not, you may just find that at an unconscious level, you're treating people the same way. It's amazing the way it works, but it's because we humans are programmed by what we see and hear consistently over time. So there are various reasons, why this toxicity happens. And when it's from people at a high level, it makes it really difficult for the organization. It could actually be the founder, like I just said about my friend. It could be the founder that is actually toxic.
That's a great place to start. Where I thought we were going was going to be talking about team members and employees, but wow, that is so much better. We need to start with the person that's listening to this podcast is like, let's have some self-reflection as a leader. Are you the one that's bringing toxic behavior to the workplace? Then check, let's say you're not. We're going to assume maybe you're not. Then we can talk about how maybe others that are in your business are showing up with toxic behavior. Before we jump to that topic, do you have any advice on someone what is that next step? They're listening and they're like, oh, so start with myself. Yeah, maybe it was the way I was raised, right? So like for me, my own journey, personal development has made me a better leader because even when I've been married for 20 plus years, even when I was newly married, I'm a better wife today than I was 20 years ago, right? And so the way that I was raised, there was like ways in talking to people or things that were normalized that are just not functional, more dysfunctional. And so if someone's listening and they're like, yep, I might be bringing some dysfunction and toxicity to the business, after they've acknowledged that, which is a great first step, what can they do to move forward?
Thank you. So self-awareness is a big plus for a leader, right? Gratefully, we humans have a special gift, the ability to come out of ourselves and to look at our lives like outsiders, right? That's what imagination helps us to do. So a leader has got to do that once in a while, where you honestly look at yourself. And it happens, maybe we read a new book or we listen to a podcast like this with Amber and we realize, okay, wait a minute, I never thought about that. Okay, so leaders literally shape the culture in an organization. Literally. Yes, it has a lot to do with what you say and all of that, but it has a whole lot to do with what you do, your own behavior, right? What you're modeling, okay, in the system. So I would encourage that self-awareness. And in the event that you think, okay, I think I need some adjusting to do, I recommend you get a coach, right? Someone who can talk to you in an impartial way, right? They're not your employee, whatever, right? It's you pay them to tell you the truth, right? And they can advise on what you can adjust here, what you can adjust there, and so on. Attend conferences that have to do with the areas where you want to improve. Of course, we leaders always read. That's the first thing you do, right? You go on Amazon, find out, is there any book on this subject, that can help you. Yeah.
Can you list some common toxic traits that a leader has? I'm going to give you just like a couple examples that come to mind for me. Passive aggressiveness, complaining about other team members to other team members. So in this vein, can you list a few common toxic behaviors to be more specific so that someone listening can help? We're going to help them be observant of their behavior by being more specific in these examples.
Right. So I did mention about rudeness, right? Talking to people with disrespect. That's one. Creating division within the team. So some leaders think actually that that's the way to ensure that the team doesn't band against you, right?
Interesting. See, that's a thought I would never had, but I can totally see that thought process.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Keep them arguing amongst themselves so they're not pointing the finger at you.
Right. Exactly. A toxic leader also uses anger to manipulate, right? So it's not wrong to be angry. However, if the anger is uncontrollable, if the temper is uncontrollable, if it's the kind that you go off the handle and you say unprintable things that should never be said, you shred people's self-esteem to pieces and so on, or you throw tantrums. Now there's a problem there, right?
Absolutely.
There's a problem there because you create a culture of fear in in the system. You create a culture of fear. And you did mention about gossip. That's a big deal for a leader, I must say. That's a big deal for you to be talking.
It is really building mistrust. This is from, teaching my son on elementary school. If your friend is talking about someone else, they're probably talking about you. It doesn't stop there.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's how it works. So those are some of the things I can think
Yeah.
of. Yeah.
What do you think of this one? And it's avoiding hard conversations. And so this is a good transition into, team members being toxic. I hear it, I see it, I hear the stories, and I can agree that there's toxic behavior in an employee, but it's also toxic behavior in the leader if they want to just close their eyes and not see it or not deal with it because it's a hard conversation, because everyone sees it, right? And I'll think back to my own experience when I was an employee and leadership didn't address someone else that was being toxic. I didn't feel like they were watching out for me. I didn't feel like they had my best interest. And so that feels like a very toxic. It wasn't just my thoughts about the person being toxic. I then started having thoughts about leadership and how could they be turning a blind eye to such behavior?
Absolutely. So whatever leadership tolerates, communicates to everybody else on the team about what is acceptable, right? So if you tolerate toxic behavior, then everybody gets the message. It's okay to be toxic here. In fact, there may be no reward for you for being the good guy, right? And that then lowers the standard in the team gradually, because there doesn't seem to be, there are no consequences for bad behavior, and probably no no results or compensation for good behavior. So why should we behave right then? Like there's no point.
That's right. That's right. And so now you're decreasing morale, productivity. You're not maximizing people's potential because now they're showing up to the lowest standard for many people. I don't think that that's always true, but for a lot of people, it's easy to go from, well, why am I working so hard? I'm going to just show up like they are, in some examples.
Exactly.
Yeah. So once a leader has identified or experienced what they perceive, and I want to say that word, perceived toxic behavior, because just like in a relationship, it's often miscommunication. How do you address it? Like, what are those steps in dealing with it in a small business? When I just want to recognize that my experience was in corporate where there was layers of management and so many employees. But in this scenario, sometimes, there's toxic behavior, but you also have context and you're like, oh, their kid got sick or their spouse left them, like, intimate pieces of their life. And so we can be dismissive of toxic behavior, but I don't think that always limits the cost of that toxic behavior. So when it's such a relationship, what are some strategies that we can implement to turn employees around to be positive?
Right. Thank you. Okay. So first, it's important we're careful about what we label toxic, right? I always encourage leaders to lead from a place of love, right? Now, that's one word we don't hear that often in the boardroom, right? People say, oh, you tell me to love people? Won't that make me soft, right? How do I love people? And then what if they mess up? What if they make mistakes? What am I supposed to do? I say, well, if you really understood the nature of love, you would know that if you really love someone, you will help them to stay within the boundaries. And if they break a policy, you impose the consequences because you are helping them to establish clear boundaries in their lives, right? So I say to managers that serve under me, if someone came late, right, terribly late, the first thing to do is not to explode in anger, because that lateness may have a context, right? Why don't you ask them first, especially if it's not been in their habit? Why don't you ask first what happened? And you may just find out. Maybe someone took ill or close, they just lost a close one, or something happened on their way to work and so on. If you hear, then you can empathize. If that's the right thing for you to do, you empathize, right? I said, but if you explode first before you hear, you may feel foolish by the time they tell you why they came late, right?
Absolutely.
And I say you have to be careful that you're not communicating that the task is more important to you than them. Right?
Yes. I love that. So leading with, as you put it, love, benefit of the doubt if this isn't their consistent behavior. And I just want to add not having assumptions, because in your example, the leader may have blown up. Absolutely, that can happen. But I also see that a leader doesn't say anything at all, and then they get resentment and they make assumptions and they never asked, why were you late? And that could have also just cleared the air and everybody could be on the same page instead of leading with assumptions.
Absolutely. Thank you. Now, this is important. What do they say? Communication is the lifeblood of relationships. And leadership is relationships, right? You're working in the same space. It's about communication. It's got to happen. It's got to be there. So I agree with you perfectly. If we're the kind of a leader who sees someone do something wrong and then says nothing, it creates a culture of uncertainty, especially when the person knows they did something wrong. If there are other people around, they also are aware that something was done wrong, and then no consequences. Nobody says anything about anything. Gradually, you're building a culture. Everything that you do, how you deal with each situation, is strengthening the thread of the culture, gradually. So the communication matters. How do you deal with it? You find out, okay. This guy is going out of line, creating problems around here, causing division in the team, instigating other people, right? Because you just have people like that on the team who are the ones influencing others negatively, spreading wrong narratives, and some are just pure assumptions and so on. What do? You've got to call the person down to a discussion. That's the starting point, right? You've got to have your facts, okay? Have your clear facts. And then there's got to be that talk. You've got to be professional about it. You've got to be calm. If you start up exploding in anger, the emotion is going to distract from the facts of the situation, right? And they may interpret it to be something personal. Okay, oh, sure. She's the boss. I always knew that she never liked me, right? And that just distracts you from the real deal. So you got to stay calm. And stay focused on finding a solution. You state exactly what you have observed over time and ask, and then say what you think the standard should be, and ask if there's a reason why they're not doing the right thing.
Can you give me an example? Because when I hear facts, I'm like facts. We need no opinion, right?
Yes.
Okay. So you're working with someone and you see that they are having a nasty tone with a coworker, that they're speaking like they're condescending, right?
Yeah.
It's almost so loose you can't grab it, but you know it's happening.
Right.
And do you label it as those words? Because that's my definition of what condescending looks like, but maybe that's not their definition.
Right.
So do you label it? Do you call that out? Or do you just talk about examples of what you're looking for and what you expect in communication?
Right. So in a scenario like that, to establish facts, I would speak to the person that was being spoken to, at least to get how they felt.
Oh, yes.
So I could overhear a conversation and feel like, oh, something is wrong here. Whereas the person that was being spoken to did not see it like that, right? So I want to establish the fact of the situation. I remember I witnessed a conversation once, and it was between the father and the daughter. And I felt that the daughter was being rude. Now, of course, I did not interfere in the discussion. After the discussion, later on, I asked the daughter, why were you talking to your dad like that? That sounded rude to me. And she said, oh no, my dad definitely didn't see it like that. He raised us like that to always express our opinion and to never be afraid of him, to the extent we will not say what was on our mind. I said, oh, wow. So I misinterpreted the situation. I thought there was a problem.
Right.
There was not, right? So
I could see that happening a lot. Yes. So confirm, don't make assumptions as to what that other person is experiencing or feeling.
Exactly. So now, of course, then there's also the possibility that when you ask, they really were tearing the person down, right? If it's people at par, at about the same level, I will encourage the person that was being spoken to take it up with the person directly and try to resolve it. And if it's not resolved, if the other person does not take seriously the fact that someone is complaining that they're hurt, enough to find a solution, then I'm going to step in. Then, of course, I then have my facts, right? In fact, the likelihood is that I'll call a meeting and I'll be there with the two of them, and I'll say, well, so person says this happened and she's tried to discuss it and it's like, it's not working. How do you see it, right? And I help to resolve. I had a scenario where a junior staff spoke in the open, to a senior staff in one of our organizations in a way that was wrong. And it was people there that reported it to me that it was appropriate. And I called this person, and broached the issue. What made it complicated was that it involved this younger gentleman's wife, right? It was an issue that involved his wife. So I understand the emotional dimension to the issue there.
Yeah, very personal, right? Not just work related. Yeah.
Exactly. It was very personal and, of course, emotional. And I just said, well, just for the sake of next time, do you think you could have handled this thing in a better way? And he said, no. No. If it ever happens again, I'll do exactly the same thing I did. Say, well, I think you could have handled this in a better way. I think you could have, because at the end of the day, it wasn't good on you. It wasn't good on him. It wasn't good on your wife, and so on. So, you could have, taken it away from the public space like that, and we could have dealt with it. I promise you. He said, no. No, if it ever happens again, I'll do exactly the same. And I said, okay. It looks like we're having some differences in values here, right? And we're having differences. We're beginning to have differences in values here, right? We have organizational values. And I'm telling you, how you went about it was not in alignment with this particular value that we have. And those values are meant to guide our behavior here. And he says, well, I'm sorry. If it happens again, I'll do exactly the way I did it. Okay, fine. I'm sure if we can't agree on the values, then maybe we shouldn't be working together, right? It was disappointing for me that it had to go that way, but I was conscious that we were building a culture. We didn't want a culture where our staff would be fighting in public, right? Or shouting on themselves in public and so on at all, right? So there is always that need for communication, right? To discuss the issue, to get context for whatever anyone did or has been doing. And then there's a need to align everything with the values of the organization. At the end of the day, that's the major measuring stick. That's got to be the standard. And if it gets to the extreme, then of course we have to bring out our books. But like you said, let's limit it to small businesses. Although the earlier we can have our standards written down and clear for everyone, the better for everybody. At the end of the day,
Absolutely.
it's what's written down that we use to measure.
Yeah. So that was a really good example. And obviously it was heated. It was emotional. You were giving them the benefit of the doubt. They weren't being let go for that situation, but rather that you had this standard of values that you needed to get in alignment with and buy-in that is how future situations were going to be handled.
Right.
How much dysfunction or toxicity do you take before you say, because I'm stumbling over my words, because here's the lens I'm saying it through.
Mm-hmm.
I want to give people the benefit of the doubt. My clients often want to give people the benefit of the doubt.
Mm-hmm.
And so you talk to them, you talk to them, right? And you're thinking, surely they're going to turn a corner soon.
Yeah.
What is the standard? How long is too much time where you say, you know what, they're not going to turn a corner. I have to cut my losses. And I'm asking this because I actually had a very good friend who is a business owner have one of their key employees who had been with them for a very long time make a hard right. Everything about the relationship in the whole office or company turned toxic. And we're talking and I'm like, let him go, right? Well, full circle, my friend coached them through this, supported them through this, and got an entire turnaround to where this person is back to being the star employee.
Wow.
I'm being vulnerable here. Me, I would have cut my losses and said, move on. And I am so proud of my dear friend because the end of the story is she got to keep someone who was very valuable to the company,
right,
who was obviously going through, this wasn't a week. This was months and months of really turbulent times.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that example and how myself and my friend would have handled that very differently?
Well, I would say, at least as a leadership coach, that we start out by believing in people, right? We start out by believing in people, expecting the best from them. And when things begin to go south, I strongly recommend we give people the benefit of the doubt for a start. Honestly, the first thing I want to do is to have that conversation where, and it's happened before, somebody just begins to behave out of character. And, the person's getting everybody worried. I get to have a sit down. What's going on? The likelihood is something is going on in another area of their lives that is showing up on the job. Right?
That is so true.
Yeah, we should never forget that. The things going on outside, of people's work lives can have tremendous impact on what they're doing on their jobs, get them distracted completely. Maybe somebody is having a relationship problem, right? Maybe somebody is suffering some trauma from somewhere. Maybe they're having financial problems, or it's a health problem, or a close family member is having a serious health problem, all of that, and they have to go stay in the hospital, they're not sleeping well, and all sorts of things. So we can empathize, right? We can empathize with them and then guide them through it. I had a scenario where it was a gentleman, and I said, look, that's why I'm here for you. By the time he went through everything, I said, I've been through everything you're talking about before. Okay. So why don't we go about it this way? Okay. Let me give you these assignments, do this and this and this. Okay. And then we're going to meet together once every month for the next 6 months. Is that okay? He said, yes. And yeah, during that period, everything got back for him and it was back and nice and good.
Yeah.
So I would recommend that first. I've also had scenarios where we did that. Well, this was a more junior officer and I didn't attend to the person directly, but we had to appoint a mentor, right? Someone to work with the gentleman, meet with the gentleman every week because his standard of work had fallen so terribly, right? And we tried all that. At first, nothing worked in 6 months. And then we tried again another 6 months and we told ourselves, if nothing works this time, we'll have to let this gentleman go, right? So we had to let him go eventually. And amazingly, the last time I asked about him, he's been doing amazingly well.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
So I say then to people, letting someone go is not a vote of no confidence on their destiny. It's likely an opportunity to allow them to find where they would thrive better. Your environment, your organization may just not be the best place for them. But I would like a situation where we've actually tried. Sometimes we actually change a person's role, right? We change their duties, just to see maybe they're not actually functioning in the area of genius. Maybe they're bored, maybe they're frustrated or something. I would prefer we tweak things quite a bit. And then the last resort is to let them go. I should say something though. A leader has got to know when that time has come. Absolutely not beneficial to you. It's not beneficial to the person. It's not beneficial to anybody to keep someone one day longer than they should stay if they need to go.
Very well said. Now, I have to tell you, in that example, I was dead wrong. And I think she handled it amazing. She, my friend who remains nameless. And you actually nailed it. It had to do with being in the wrong role. There had been a change. The wrong role this person was in pulled back some responsibilities that were not in their zone of genius, because when they were in new roles, it was causing frustration and, feelings and resentment. And so my friend was able to recognize that. And I remember being pulled over on the side of the road, talking to her on the phone. And she told me this whole story. And I was like, thank you for all the lessons that you have just taught me as a leader on how she handled this. Yeah. And what I heard you say is, do not ignore toxic behavior. Address it with facts and curiosity, compassion, perhaps have some grace, because as you were sharing your examples, to self-reflect, I don't show up exactly the same way every day in work. I have a real life, and there's sometimes very real things that are happening. And I would hope that my team members who I lead have grace for me as I'd want to have for them. Right. And what I also heard you say is that it's an actively evolving situation. So in the examples you shared was that once that toxic behavior was addressed, there was a plan of support, a plan of checking in, and always taking kind of check-in points. So I'm assuming the leader knows when the day has come that you need to part ways. Is that a good summary of that's what I experienced listening to your advice, but you can correct me or refine that summary.
You did an amazing job, Amber.
Okay, great. So we're leading with love and compassion and facts, and we're going to be supportive. But the answer is not ignoring the toxic behavior, either from yourself or from team members, because that is not the businesses we want to be running and experiencing.
Absolutely. There's no ignoring it.
Yes. Okay, this has been such a great conversation. Do you have any last thoughts or anything you would like to leave with our listeners around leadership and toxic behavior?
Well, this is what I would just like to say. At the end of the day, we leaders need to focus on culture. the culture that we're building. It's intentional. Culture is to a group of people what habits are to us as individuals. Now, habit is programming. We call it second nature. We say it's when something stayed long enough in your mind and it becomes routinous, the mind pushes it down to the subconscious. Now, subconscious doesn't make it inferior. Actually, that's where it becomes powerful because it puts you on auto programming. You do things without having to think. Your heart or your subconscious thinks for you. And because that is default programming, if you then make a decision with your conscious mind that is contrary to the programming overruns it. Like people made New Year resolutions this year. I'll not do this anymore. But if you've not changed the programming, the habit will eventually overwhelm your new decision. So it's the same thing with an organization. Oh, we don't want this in our organization. But has it been there? Has it become part of the culture in the organization? Culture is very difficult to change. Very difficult because it is formed over time. And my recommendation, I read a book in wanting to help leaders, to be able to achieve sustainable transformation, because that's what I found out. Most transformation efforts fail. In order to achieve sustainable transformation, I developed a methodology that I call shifts. SHIFTS. The S is for seeing, the H is for hearing, the I is insight, the F is formulate. I will explain them. The T is transform, and the S is succeed. And this is the principle. Whatever you see and hear consistently over time will enter your heart. It will go into that subconscious. If you take time to reflect, to think deeply about the things you're seeing and hearing, you gain insight. Like somebody's going to listen to this podcast and the light is going to turn on in their face. Oh, wow. Okay. No wonder I've not been getting the result I want. It's because I've been doing it this way. If I do it this other way, I'll get the result I want. Okay, from today, I'm not going to do what I used to do before. I'll do something new. That's the formulate. That's the decision-making part. That's where you really change. And after that, you take action. And that's what I call transform, because that's where you get to get practical results. So I wrote the book to help leaders because I have applied that methodology in my personal life, in the organizations that I run. And in the book, I actually propose how it can be applied to nations.
Really, very interesting. So to be clear, that's going to help someone why it's very difficult to change culture. You can, and your framework is going to help them have lasting, sustainable transformation. And with everything we talked about today, you're saying culture is kind of like the water that a fish is in. It's all around us.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Okay. And if we can focus on that, then our decision-making as a leader becomes easier and to lead and to hold standards.
Absolutely.
Okay, we will definitely be linking out to your book and how they can get it in the show notes. I'll talk more about it in the official outro. Right. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your expertise. And really, I learned a lot from you as well. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much, Amber, for having me. It's been a beautiful conversation.
I have loved having you listen to this episode of the Small Business Straight Talk podcast, and I sure hope you found my conversation with Dr. Sam to be incredibly insightful and valuable. But I need to be straight with you. No change, no change. Without taking action, nothing will change for you or your business. So based on my conversation with Dr. Sam, what is one small action you can take? And you don't need to make this huge. I genuinely mean one small action. Have you had that little voice going on in your head thinking, I might be a little toxic to my team? Or maybe you have a small little whisper saying that there is someone on your team that's toxic and you may have avoided dealing with it. I hope that with today's conversation, you are encouraged to first start with observing to see if there's toxic behavior. And then secondly, determine what action is necessary based on the toxic behavior, whether the toxic behavior comes from yourself or a team member. This is critical to ensure that you are addressing this before it becomes a bigger problem for your business. If you are new here, welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss another episode. And if you've enjoyed today's episode, be sure to share it with a fellow business owner who you think would find it valuable. Truly, all it takes is to hit the share button and send it to their email, send it to their text message, let them know that you enjoyed this interview, this podcast episode today, and you think they will enjoy it as well. So that's my straight talk for today. Until next time, have a productive week.